Minnesota is a state in the Midwestern United States. Minnesota was admitted as the 32nd state on May 11, 1858, created from the eastern half of the Minnesota Territory. Its name comes from the Dakota word for clear blue water. Owing to its large number of lakes, the state is informally known as the Land of 10,000 Lakes. Its official motto is La Étoile du Nord. Minnesota is the 12th largest in area and the 21st most populous of the U.S. states. Nearly 60% of its residents live in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area, the center of transportation, business, industry, education, and government, and home to an internationally known arts community. The remainder of the state consists of western prairies now given over to intensive agriculture, deciduous forests in the southeast, now partially cleared, farmed and settled, and the less populated northwards, used for mining, forestry, and recreation. Minnesota is known for its idiosyncratic social and political orientations and its high rate of civic participation and voter turnout. Until European settlement, Minnesota was inhabited by the Dakota and Ojibwa, Anishinaabe. The large majority of the original European settlers immigrated from Scandinavia and Germany, and the state remains a center of Scandinavian American and German American culture. In recent decades, immigration from Asia, the Horn of Africa, and Latin America has expanded its demographic and cultural composition. Minnesota's standard of living index is among the highest in the United States, and the state is also among the best educated and wealthiest in the nation. Etymology. The word Minnesota comes from the Dakota name for the Minnesota River, Masota. The root MNI means water, and to means blue. Masota can be translated as clear blue water or clouded blue water depending on pronunciation. Native Americans demonstrated the name to early settlers by dropping milk into water and calling it Masota. Many places in the state have similar names, such as Minnehaha Falls, Minishka, Minneota, Minnetonka, Minnetrista, and Minneapolis. A combination of MNI and polis, the Greek word for city. Geography. Minnesota is the second northernmost U.S. state. Its isolated northwest angle in Lake of the Woods County is the only part of the 48 contiguous states lying north of the 49th parallel. The state is part of the U.S. region known as the Upper Midwest and part of North America's Great Lakes region. It shares a Lake Superior water border with Michigan and a land and water border with Wisconsin to the east. Iowa is to the south, North Dakota and South Dakota are to the west, and the Canadian provinces of Ontario and Manitoba are to the north. With 86,943 square miles, or approximately 2.25% of the United States, Minnesota is the 12th largest state. Geology. Minnesota contains some of the oldest rocks found on Earth. Gneisses are about 3.6 billion years old. About 2.7 billion years ago, basaltic lava poured out of cracks in the floor of the primordial ocean. The remains of this volcanic rock formed the Canadian Shield in northeast Minnesota. The roots of these volcanic mountains in the action of Precambrian seas formed the Iron Range of northern Minnesota. Following a period of volcanism 1.1 billion years ago, Minnesota's geological activity has been more subdued, with no volcanism or mountain formation, but with repeated incursions of the sea, which left behind multiple strata of sedimentary rock. In more recent times, massive ice sheets at least 1 kilometer thick ravaged the landscape of the state and sculpted its current terrain. The Wisconsin glaciation left 12,000 years ago. These glaciers covered all of Minnesota except the far southeast, an area characterized by steep hills and streams that cut into the bedrock. This area is known as the driftless zone for its absence of glacial drift. Much of the remainder of the state outside the northeast has 50 feet or more of glacial till left behind as the last glaciers retreated. gigantic Lake Agassiz formed in the northwest 13,000 years ago. Its bed created the fertile Red River Valley, and its outflow, glacial River Warren, carved the valley of the Minnesota River and the upper Mississippi downstream from Fort Snelling. Minnesota is geologically quiet today. It experiences earthquakes infrequently, and most of them are minor. The state's high point is Eagle Mountain at 2,301 feet, which is only 13 miles away from the low of 601 feet at the shore of Lake Superior. Notwithstanding dramatic local differences in elevation, much of the state is a gently rolling peneplain. Two major drainage divides meet in the northeastern part of Minnesota in rural Hibbing, forming a triple watershed. Precipitation can follow the Mississippi River south to the Gulf of Mexico, the St. Lawrence Seaway east to the Atlantic Ocean, or the Hudson Bay watershed to the Arctic Ocean. The state's nickname, the Land of 10,000 Lakes, is no exaggeration. There are 11,842 Minnesota lakes over 10 acres in size. The Minnesota portion of Lake Superior is the largest at 962,700 acres and deepest body of water in the state. Minnesota has 6,564 natural rivers and streams that cumulatively flow for 69,000 miles. The Mississippi River begins its journey from its headwaters at Lake Itasca and crosses the Iowa border 680 miles downstream. It is joined by the Minnesota River at Fort Snelling, by the St. Croix River near Hastings, by the Chippewa River at Wabasha, and by many smaller streams. The Red River, in the bed of glacial Lake Agassiz, drains the northwest part of the state northward toward Canada's Hudson Bay. Approximately 10.6 million acres of wetlands are contained within Minnesota's borders, the most of any state except Alaska. Flora and fauna. Minnesota has 4 ecological provinces. Prairie Parkland, in the southwestern and western parts of the state, the eastern broadleaf forest in the southeast, extending in a narrowing strip to the northwestern part of the state, where it transitions into tallgrass aspen parkland, and the northern Laurentian mixed forest, a transitional forest between the northern boreal forest and broadleaf forests to the south. These northern forests are a vast wilderness of pine and spruce trees mixed with patchy stands of birch and poplar. Much of Minnesota's northern forest underwent logging at some time, leaving only a few patches of old-growth forest today in areas such as in the Chippewa National Forest and the Superior National Forest, where the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness has some 400,000 acres of unlogged land. Although logging continues, regrowth and replanting keeps about 1/3 of the state forested. Nearly all of Minnesota's prairies and oak savannas have been fragmented by farming, grazing, logging, and suburban development. While loss of habitat has affected native animals such as the pine marten, elk, woodland caribou, and bison, others like white-tailed deer and bobcat thrive. The state has the nation's largest population of timber wolves outside Alaska, and supports healthy populations of black bear, moose, and gophers. Located on the Mississippi Flyway, Minnesota hosts migratory waterfowl such as geese and ducks, and game birds such as grouse, pheasants, and turkeys. It is home to birds of prey including the largest number of breeding pairs of bald eagles in the lower 48 states as of 2007, red-tailed hawk, and snowy owl. The lakes teem with sport fish such as walleye, bass, muskellunge, and northern pike, and streams in the southeast and northeast are populated by brook, brown, and rainbow trout. Climate. Minnesota experiences temperature extremes characteristic of its continental climate, with cold winters and hot summers. The record high and low span is 174 degrees Fahrenheit, from -60 degrees Fahrenheit at Tower on February 2, 1996, to 114 degrees Fahrenheit at Moorhead on July 6, 1936. Meteorological events include rain, snow, blizzards, thunderstorms, hail, derecho, tornadoes, and high-velocity straight-line winds. The growing season varies from 90 days per year in the Iron Range to 160 days in southeast Minnesota near the Mississippi River, and average temperatures range from 37 to 49 degrees Fahrenheit. Average summer dew points range from about 58 degrees Fahrenheit in the south to about 48 degrees Fahrenheit in the north. Average annual precipitation ranges from 19 to 35 inches, and droughts occur every 10 to 50 years. Protected lands. Minnesota's first state park, Itasca State Park, was established in 1891, and is the source of the Mississippi River. Today Minnesota has 72 state parks and recreation areas, 58 state forests covering about 4 million acres, and numerous state wildlife preserves, all managed by the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. There are 5.5 million acres in the Chippewa and Superior National Forests. The Superior National Forest in the northeast contains the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, which encompasses over 1 million acres and 1,000 lakes. To its west is Voyageurs National Park. The Mississippi National River and Recreation Area is a 72-mile-long corridor along the Mississippi River through the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area, connecting a variety of sites of historic, cultural, and geologic interest. History. Before European settlement of North America, Minnesota was populated by the Dakota people. As Europeans settled the East Coast, Native American movement away from them caused migration of the Anishinaabe and other Native Americans into the Minnesota area. The first Europeans in the area were French fur traders who arrived in the 17th century. Late that century, Anishinaabe, also known as Ojibwe Indians, migrated westward to Minnesota, causing tensions with the Dakota people. Explorers such as Daniel Graysolon, Sieur du Lhut, Father Louis Hennepin, Jonathan Carver, Henry Schoolcraft, and Joseph Nicolay, among others, mapped out the state. In 1762 the region became part of Spanish Louisiana until 1802. The portion of the state east of the Mississippi River became part of the United States at the end of the American Revolutionary War, when the Second Treaty of Paris was signed. Land west of the Mississippi River was acquired with the Louisiana Purchase, although a portion of the Red River Valley was disputed until the Treaty of 1818. In 1805, Zebulon Pike bargained with Native Americans to acquire land at the confluence of the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers. The construction of Fort Snelling followed between 1819 and 1825. Its soldiers built a grist mill and a sawmill at St. Anthony Falls, the first of the water-powered industries around which the city of Minneapolis later grew. Meanwhile, squatters, government officials, and tourists had settled near the fort. In 1839, the army forced him to move downriver, and they settled in the area that became St. Paul. Minnesota Territory was formed on March 3, 1849. The first territorial legislature was dominated by men from New England or of New England ancestry. Thousands of people had come to build farms and cut timber, and Minnesota became the 32nd U.S. state on May 11, 1858. The founding population was so overwhelmingly of New England origins that the state was dubbed the New England of the West. Treaties between European settlers and the Dakota and Ojibwe gradually forced the natives off their lands and onto smaller reservations. In 1861, a residents of Mankato formed the Knights of the Forest, with the goal of eliminating all Indians from Minnesota. As conditions deteriorated for the Dakota, tensions rose, leading to the Dakota War of 1862. The result of the 6-week war was the execution of 38 Dakota and the exile of most of the rest of the Dakota to the Crow Creek Reservation in Dakota Territory. As many as 800 white settlers died during the war. Logging and farming were mainstays of Minnesota's early economy. The sawmills at St. Anthony Falls, and logging centers like Marine on St. Croix, Stillwater, and Winona, processed high volumes of lumber. These cities were situated on rivers that were ideal for transportation. Later, St. Anthony Falls was tapped to provide power for flour mills. Innovations by Minneapolis millers led to the production of Minnesota patent flour, which commanded almost double the price of Baker's, or clear, flour, which it replaced. By 1900, Minnesota mills, led by Pillsbury, Northwestern and the Washburn-Crosby Company, were grinding 14.1% of the nation's grain. The state's iron mining industry was established with the discovery of iron in the Vermilion Range and the Mesabi Range in the 1880s, and in the Cuyuna Range in the early 20th century. The ore was shipped by rail to Duluth and two harbors, then loaded onto ships and transported eastward over the Great Lakes. Industrial development and the rise of manufacturing caused the population to shift gradually from rural areas to cities during the early 20th century. Nevertheless, farming remained prevalent. Minnesota's economy was hard hit by the Great Depression, resulting in lower prices for farmers, layoffs among iron miners, and labor unrest. Compounding the adversity, western Minnesota and the Dakotas were hit by drought from 1931 to 1935. New Deal programs provided some economic turnaround. The Civilian Conservation Corps and other programs around the state established some jobs for Indians on their reservations, and the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934 provided the tribes with a mechanism of self-government. This provided natives a greater voice within the state, and promoted more respect for tribal customs because religious ceremonies and native languages were no longer suppressed. After World War II, industrial development quickened. New technology increased farm productivity through automation of feedlots for hogs and cattle, machine milking at dairy farms, and raising chickens in large buildings. Planting became more specialized with hybridization of corn and wheat, and the use of farm machinery such as tractors and combines became the norm. University of Minnesota Professor Norman Baller contributed to these developments as part of the Green Revolution. Suburban development accelerated due to increased post-war housing demand and convenient transportation. Increased mobility, in turn, enabled more specialized jobs. Minnesota became a center of technology after World War II. Engineering Research Associates was formed in 1946 to develop computers for the United States Navy. It later merged with Remington Rand, and then became Sperry Rand. William Norris left Sperry in 1957 to form Control Data Corporation. Cray Research was formed when Seymour Cray left CDC to form his own company. Medical device maker Medtronic also started business in the Twin Cities in 1949. Cities and towns. St. Paul, located in east-central Minnesota along the banks of the Mississippi River, has been Minnesota's capital city since 1849. First as capital of the Territory of Minnesota, and then as state capital since 1858. St. Paul is adjacent to Minnesota's most populous city, Minneapolis. They and their suburbs are known collectively as the Twin Cities metropolitan area, the 13th largest metropolitan area in the United States and home to about 60% of the state's population. The remainder of the state is known as Greater Minnesota, or Outstate Minnesota. The state has 17 cities with populations above 50,000. In descending order of population, they are Minneapolis, St. Paul, Rochester, Duluth, Bloomington, Brooklyn Park, Plymouth, St. Cloud, Woodbury, Eagan, Maple Grove, Coon Rapids, Eden Prairie, Minnetonka, Burnsville, Apple Valley, Blaine and Lakeville. Of these only Rochester, Duluth, and St. Cloud are outside the Twin Cities metropolitan area. Minnesota's population continues to grow, primarily in the urban centers. The populations of metropolitan Sherburne and Scott counties doubled between 1980 and 2000. While 40 of the state's 87 counties lost residents over the same period.